This is a street in the suburbs of Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's a pretty typical street, but it does have one unusual feature: a giant roundabout at its end instead of a typical road. And this street isn't even that unusual. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing travel experiences. But today, you don't really see many of them anymore. So why did our streets used to all have cul-de-sacs? If you're my age, you probably grew up on a street with cul-de-sacs. A street with a circular end can feel like a safe little community within a larger city. It's a place where kids can roam free and cars are forced to go slow because there's nowhere to really go. You might think that they make sense because they prevent cut-through traffic, keep speeds low, and provide a nice place for kids to play. And that's true. But those aren't actually the reasons cities used to build so many cul-de-sacs. Those benefits came later. Today, almost 75% of single-family homes in the U.S. are located on a cul-de-sac, and the cul-de-sacs make up only about 2% of the total road miles. That means there's an average of 45 homes per cul-de-sac. But that wasn't always the case. For most of American history, it was unusual for homes to be grouped together in tight little clusters like this. Instead, houses were generally spaced far apart from each other with long, winding roads connecting them to everything else. This made it easy for residents to travel to the places they needed to go while avoiding most of their neighbors. But after World War II, Americans started thinking about their neighborhoods differently. Before the war, most people lived in cities. But after the war, more people than ever had the financial means to buy a home in the suburbs. And these new suburbs weren't going to look like the older parts of town. They were going to be purpose-built for the modern age. And nowhere was that more apparent than in the layout of the streets. In the early days of suburbia, the streets were often laid out in grids, just like the business districts of downtowns. But the grid layout didn't really work for the new kind of neighborhood. See, in a traditional downtown, the grid layout makes a lot of sense. Most trips are short, with people walking or taking public transit. Streets have multiple uses with businesses, housing, and services all along the way. The grid layout allows for lots of direct connections between origins and destinations. But in a residential neighborhood, people are mostly traveling by car. And with all the destinations being spread out, the grid forces everyone onto the same heavily trafficked streets. A better solution was needed, something that would encourage people to travel by car, but also keep speeds low and prevent cut-through traffic. That's where the cul-de-sac came in. By breaking the grid and creating small loops, the cul-de-sac design spread people out, both in terms of their proximity to other homes and their proximity to destinations outside the neighborhood. The idea became popular in the 1930s in England before making its way over to the United States. The first large-scale use of the cul-de-sac in the U.S. was the Greenbelt suburbs of Washington, D.C. Today, you can still find some of the original cul-de-sacs from the 1930s still intact around the capital. At first, they were usually called either closed ends or court ends. But as they grew in popularity, real estate developers started calling them circle ends or cul-de-sacs. The term cul-de-sac actually comes from French and literally translates to bag end. I guess it seemed like a cool name to French Canadians who first brought the term over to America. Once the design took off, home buyers loved it. Compared to traditional streets, cul-de-sacs felt safer and more friendly. On a regular street, cars were often speeding or using the road as a cut-through to get somewhere else. But on a cul-de-sac, drivers were limited to the speed of the slowest driver, usually some mom in a minivan. The design also gave kids more space to roam. It created a strong sense of community, which is likely why 90% of residents said they liked living on a cul-de-sac in one survey. And this explains why we used to build so many cul-de-sacs. Homeowners loved them. But there was another reason why they were so popular, and that was the automobile. Even though most trips in the suburbs are short, most suburban trips are still made by car. Public transit was never very popular in the suburbs, and the personal car offers a lot of flexibility. But until recently, cars weren't very good at traveling short distances. Early cars in the 1900s were expensive to operate, so people would drive them until they broke down and then have them towed to a mechanic. Early engines ran poorly at low speeds, so driving slowly ate up more fuel. And finally, the chassis of early cars couldn't handle sharp turns, meaning they had to be designed around wide, sweeping curves. All of this meant that the streets in early suburbs often had to be designed for high speeds, with long sight lines and wide right-of-ways. Residents would then have to deal with cut-through traffic speeding through their neighborhood at dangerous speeds. But starting in the 1960s, automakers made several key improvements. Power steering made it easier to maneuver at low speeds. Better shocks and tires reduced the effects of sharp turns. And the invention of the automatic transmission made it more efficient to drive slowly. These innovations made it possible to build narrower, slower streets that were much more pedestrian-friendly. This is when the cul-de-sac really took off. You can actually see this change if you compare maps of the same neighborhood from the 1960s and today. The circle ended up perfectly fitting the needs of the suburban homeowner, but it didn't work for everyone. Not only did it make it harder for emergency vehicles to navigate the neighborhood, but it also made it harder for residents to get in and out of their driveway. You see, the ideal cul-de-sac only has one entrance and exit at its base. This keeps drivers from cutting through the circle and turning it into a speedway. But it makes it difficult for residents to get out of their driveway without blocking the entire street. One wrong move, and you could get stuck waiting for 10 minutes, while the garbage truck tries to squeeze past your car. It's a minor inconvenience for most people, but it can be a bigger problem for emergency vehicles. On a regular street, emergency vehicles can sound their sirens and use their lights to clear the way. But on a cul-de-sac, the driver might not even know an emergency vehicle is coming until it's too late. It can take the fire department longer to reach an emergency, which is why some fire departments oppose the construction of cul-de-sacs. I know they're probably not going to tear down all the cul-de-sacs, but I'm sure the firefighters love having to do training exercises like this. Eventually, the limitations of the cul-de-sac became too much, and engineers began to search for alternatives. The roundabout was the best option. Like the cul-de-sac, the roundabout prevents cut-through traffic and forces drivers to go slow. But unlike the cul-de-sac, it doesn't force drivers to back out of their driveway into oncoming traffic. In the past couple of decades, many cities have begun replacing their old cul-de-sacs with roundabouts, but it hasn't been easy. Some residents say that roundabouts are too confusing, especially for visitors. Others say that they're dangerous because they can't be easily crossed on foot or bike. And still others say that the roundabout takes up too much space. Despite the controversy, the roundabout remains the preferred option for many cities. Cities are building fewer cul-de-sacs and converting existing cul-de-sacs into roundabouts. The transformation usually involves removing the center island and adding a raised median. Once completed, the result is a quieter, safer street that can handle higher speeds and heavier traffic. It's unlikely that any new streets will be built with cul-de-sacs, but that doesn't mean they'll be going away anytime soon. Many neighborhoods are now doing things like adding parks or other amenities to their cul-de-sacs. It gives residents a place to gather, and it helps improve the quality of life for everyone on the street. So even though we stopped building cul-de-sacs for new streets, it looks like they'll be sticking around for a long time. Now, if you want to learn about the world's busiest intersection, click here. Or if you want to learn about the worst traffic jam in history, click here.